They weren't captured by the Germans, they weren't shot by the enemy, they were killed by their own army. As the Red Army collapsed during the opening months of Operation Barbarossa, thousands of terrified Soviet soldiers fled the battlefield, starving, wounded, exhausted, desperate to live another day. But for many of them, surrender or retreat did not lead to safety. It led to a firing squad, sometimes within minutes, sometimes in front of their own comrades as a warning. This is the dark reason why captured Soviet deserters were executed by their own commanders, and why these soldiers were forgotten long after the war they never survived. In June 1941, the Soviet Union faced the most brutal invasion in its history. 3 million German soldiers crossed the border in a single day and tore through towns, villages, and entire Soviet armies as if they didn't exist. Most Red Army soldiers were barely trained. Some had no boots. Others carried rifles from the First World War. 5 men sharing one weapon. Many of these men were conscripts from Ukraine, Belarus, the Baltic states, or remote villages in the Russian countryside. Some didn't even know they were at war until German tanks appeared at the edge of their fields. They were expected to fight to the death, but when German artillery crushed their units and Luftwaffe bombers burned their supply lines, thousands ran or surrendered. Not because they were cowards, but because they were human. To Stalin, that humanity was treason. By the end of the first week of invasion, whole Soviet divisions had simply vanished. Some were encircled, others disintegrated. Many soldiers fled into the forests hoping to find their families or reach friendly lines. As the retreat grew larger, panic spread. Columns of wounded soldiers limped down the roads begging for water. Officers lost control. Entire regiments disappeared overnight. Soviet high command viewed this not as the chaos of invasion, but as betrayal, as treason, as a cancer that must be cut out immediately. And so new units were created, not to fight Germans but to kill their own. These were the Zagraditelnie Otriadi, the infamous blocking detachments. Blocking detachments stood behind Soviet front lines, not in front of them. Their orders were simple: stop any soldier trying to retreat. At any cost. If a man stepped back without orders, they shot him. If a group tried to surrender, they shot them. If a wounded soldier crawled toward the rear, they shot him. A Red Army major later wrote, "We feared our own men more than the Germans." By August 1941, so many deserters were being executed that the NKVD began keeping lists. They stopped once the numbers became too large to record. But executions didn't happen only at the front. Behind the lines, mobile NKVD tribunals, known as troikas, held rapid trials for captured deserters. Many lasted less than 5 minutes. The accused rarely had witnesses, evidence, or even the chance to speak. Some soldiers were sentenced while still bleeding from battle wounds. Others were condemned for simply becoming separated from their units during chaotic retreats. The purpose of these tribunals was not justice, but deterrence. Reports from the Western Front describe field kitchens turned into makeshift courtrooms where soldiers watched as their comrades were condemned and marched outside. Executions were often carried out immediately, the sound of gunshots echoing across bivouacs where men tried to sleep. The NKVD even punished officers who failed to prevent desertion in their ranks. Many commanders were arrested and vanished into the Gulag, accused of weak discipline or cowardly leadership. The message was clear: failure, any failure, would be paid for in blood. On July 28, 1942, Stalin issued one of the most terrifying documents in military history. Order 227, not one step back. It declared, retreat without orders was treason. Cowards would be shot. Commanders who allowed retreat would be executed. Blocking detachments must enforce discipline by gunfire if necessary. Within weeks, thousands of captured deserters were tried and executed. Some were shot individually. Others were lined up in groups so the survivors could bury the dead and then rejoin the front line. One Soviet sergeant recalled, "We fought with the Germans in front and death behind us." To understand the dark logic behind these killings, you must understand the Soviet worldview. The USSR saw war not as a military struggle, but as an ideological apocalypse, a total civilizational clash. If the Red Army broke, the entire Soviet state would collapse with it. Deserters were not just soldiers running from a gunfight. They were symbols of weakness in a system built on fear, discipline, and sacrifice. In Stalin's eyes, a deserter threatened the survival of the whole state. A deserter inspired others to flee. A deserter proved the ideology could crack. And so the punishment was immediate and absolute. Survivors described scenes too shocking to appear in wartime propaganda. One soldier wrote that during the Battle of Stalingrad, a group of 20 deserters was captured after trying to swim across the Volga. They were brought back, lined up on the riverbank, and shot as the rest of the regiment watched in silence. Another recalled a retreating unit in 1941. "We reached the crossroads and saw rifles sticking out of the trees. They were our own men. If we turned back, they would shoot us. If we went forward, the Germans would kill us. We had nowhere to live and nowhere to die." Sometimes deserters were given a choice more cruel than death. They were sent to Strafbats, punishment battalions with life expectancies measured in hours. Most never returned. In some units, the fear of execution became so overwhelming that men formed secret pacts. If one of them panicked, the others would drag him forward by force rather than let him fall back and doom them all. Veterans wrote that they sometimes physically restrained trembling teenagers who had never fired a rifle before their first battle. During the Battle of Kursk, a Soviet tank crew recounted seeing a group of infantry fleeing towards the rear under heavy German fire. Blocking troops opened fire on them instantly. Caught between machine guns and artillery, the men fell in rows, unable to move in either direction. A survivor later wrote, "We did not know who our real enemy was. All we knew was that death came from everywhere." At Stalingrad, desertion was so common in the early days of the fighting that political officers carried pistols in both hands, one for the Germans, one for their own men. Some soldiers were executed simply for stepping out of cover to find water. Others were shot for refusing to cross open ground already littered with bodies. War strips men of choices, but in the Red Army, even the instinct to survive could be punished with death. When the war ended in 1945, the Soviet Union hailed itself as the great victor over fascism. There was no room in that story for men who had run, surrendered, or simply broken under impossible conditions. Files on deserter executions were sealed. Families received no graves, no medals, no answers. Many mothers were told their sons had died heroically, even if they had been shot by Soviet bullets. Some records were destroyed entirely. Others remain classified even today. After the war, Stalin awarded medals to entire armies, but gave nothing, not even a name, to those who died trying to escape the front. They were boys drafted from villages, conscripts who never held a rifle, men who watched their world collapse under the boots of an invading army. Some froze, some panicked, some simply wanted to go home. But in a system that believed fear was the greatest weapon, there was no room for hesitation, no space for doubt. Captured Soviet deserters were executed because the Red Army believed it was better to kill its own soldiers than let them flee. They were not traitors. They were casualties of an ideology that demanded absolute obedience, even unto death. Their names may never appear on monuments, their graves may never be found, but their story remains a warning that in the darkest moments of war, the line between enemy and executioner can disappear completely. If you believe these forgotten soldiers deserve to be remembered, share this video. And for more hidden history from the deepest shadows of World War II, subscribe so you never miss a future episode.